And welcome to the stream. I am Kestrel MacKnight,
And I am Gwayn.
and welcome to the very first episode ever of Pillars of Adventuring. First stop for any adventure. And today we're going to be delving into what it means to play Dungeons and Dragons.
But first, let's talk about what Dungeons and Dragons is. Dungeons and Dragons is, at its very core, cooperative storytelling. It's players who focus on their individual character, while the DM helps weave the entire story together.
Which is what we're going to delve into today. What you need to get started, what the roles at the table are, and what is expected of each role. And more than that, what are the main parts of the experience? The first thing is you need are, books. 3 books specifically. Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual.
I'm behind a little bit.
Sorry. Yeah, I can you tell we didn't script or rehearse this at all? Now,
that's all right.
For most people at the table, the Player's Handbook is really the only one you need. This book will have all of the rules written for the game of Dungeons & Dragons. Is it perfect? No, of course not. But it gets you everything that you need to get started outside of the dice. You can either grab a set of physical dice, download an app for your phone, or use virtual dice for a virtual desktop like Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, World Anvil. There's as many different options out there as you want. There's tons of options. If you've watched any of the streams I've done, we've been using Roll20. It has its issues, but it gets everything that we need done, and has the official endorsement books from Wizards of the Coast. I almost said TSR, and that was really outdating me. The main dice you would need would be a 4-sided, a 6-sided, a 12-sided, and a 20-sided die, or D and the number. You will usually use the D20 the most with Dungeons & Dragons.
It's kind of funky looking.
Ah, you got the rainbow one, I see.
Yep.
I wonder why.
Now, the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual are what is needed for only one player at the table. This is the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master, or DM, is the one that will be controlling and narrating all of the non-player characters or NPCs. These could be monsters, shopkeepers, tavern owners, villagers, anything like that. Basically, anyone who isn't a character moved by a player at the table. The DM is pretty much the rest of the world. So it's really good to be nice to your DM. Their job is hard. Not only are they creating the world and getting the nuts and bolts of the story pulled together each week, or each time you play, but they're also a host of characters during the entire session.
Yeah, they're not only, even if it's a scripted adventure, like one of the modules, like we're running on Saturdays, even the scripted adventures go off the rails. There's a lot that a DM does, even if we're not homebrewing rules, which our session on Saturdays, I've homebrewed a lot. And it's to get a specific feel. The DM may seem like they are opposing you, but really what the DM is doing is they are providing that antagonist, that opposition for the players to move through. Is that fair?
And sometimes they're also playing a very strong ally for you as well. So they're doing both. And most DMs are not out to kill the party. Most of them are there to just narrate the story.
Yeah, and we definitely will have weeks where we're talking more about that in depth. Um, Definitely a way to expand, because we do want to go in more and not only help better players and help better dungeon masters, but really make the game more interesting and build on top of it. So, again, we're high level overview, but we'll dive into it way, way more. Um, Now, the players, they're going to have a more narrow focus. They're going to be the masters of their own mind, as it were. They will completely control one character that, if we're starting off at first level, is going to be slightly better than a normal villager. They usually have lived some life that has trained them in some way to become a basic class, and we are going to explore those in more depth in later videos. The big point I want to make, and we want to make here, is that the players are going to be the catalyst, the driving force in the story. Typically, they're going to cause things to happen. A great metaphor I like is, imagine the DM is the ocean and the players are ships sailing upon the ocean. The ocean's going to do its oceany things. There's going to be fish eating other fish. There's going to be all this other stuff that would happen in normal day-to-day life. And then the ship comes in and changes how those fish are acting, fish are moving. All of that's... the players are agents of change throughout the story.
And at the same time, then there's the shark attack that might happen to the ship in the ocean. So
there's storms that are going to hit that ship too. That happens. And the ships knew to steer clear of it, but they didn't. I've been on both sides of that, both as a DM and as a player, where I should have avoided the storm and didn't. And then there's times where, like, okay, I did everything I could as a DM to warn you not to go there, and you went there anyway. Someone's going to learn. Maybe it's me, I learned that you had really lucky rolls. Maybe it's you, you shouldn't have done that. It goes both ways.
Right. So, now that we've had kind of a basic idea of the roles that each person at the table has, let's get into a little bit more about what will be going on at the table. When reading the rules, you need to be aware of a few things. First of all, everything is flexible. Anything is possible, and specific beats general, and I'll get to that in a second. But everything is flexible means that sometimes the rules are more of a guideline than set in stone. They're not the 10 Commandments on stone tablets that Moses brings down from the mountain. They're a little bit more of a guideline. Modifiers, abilities, equipment, or other kinds of effects can change how those rules work. So don't get so hung up on a rule that you get kind of stuck. And then anything is possible means that you can attempt to do almost anything. Do you want to charge headfirst into the group of bandits trying to tackle you? Despite it being kind of a bad idea, you can certainly try that. The limits are your own imagination and what your character is established in being physically or mentally able to do.
So I'm not able to just light them on fire with my mind, right?
Unless you can throw a fireball at them, maybe. But yeah, with a roll of the dice, you can just see how effective you are at running into the group of bandits and tackling them. And sometimes you may surprise yourself. In fact, just this last weekend, I surprised myself. And I'm going to talk about that even later too, because it was really cool.
It was.
Finally, and most importantly, specific beats general. Now, there are a lot of rules that are very broadly defined. There are others that seemingly overrule that broadly defined rule with a more specific effect or action. The more specific a rule is, the more important it is. The same goes for actions. The more specific you are in what you want to do, the more likely you will be asked to do the correct thing. It also lends to a little bit more flavor and enjoyment pretty much all around.
And this is actually going to be segueing into what happened last week, because it really does build in a lot more entertainment value, because I had an idea of what Tim wanted to do with his character based on some of the other things. I could have called for a roll to have him be lifted onto the bear, so we had a wild-shaped druid that was in bear form. He picked up the character that Tim was playing, a tiefling bard.
Tiefling bard,
Yeah. And legitimately, I could have rolled for that, but I thought it was cool, so I didn't. Didn't have him roll for it.
Sometimes the rule of cool will override everything.
And it didn't really impact the game in a positive or negative way ultimately. Having him ride on the back didn't cause, oh, this is going to completely break the game one way or the other. And I was going to have it if he wasn't smart enough, the druid, to remember, oh yeah, I've got the guy on the back. I was going to have a different thing happen. Because if he decided to rear up and attack like he did a little bit before, I was going to have Skladba roll a save to see if he got hurt being flung off the back. But when... Go ahead.
I wanted to do something really cool. So there was a bad guy right in front of us. So what I wanted to do is have my tiefling jump off the back of the bear and stab with his rapier at the bad guy. So he had me roll a d20, the big die that I showed you earlier, and I rolled a natural 20, which is sort of an uncanny success, for lack of a better word. Most people call it a critical success. And so for flavor, Skladba, my character, jumps off, does a flip, and actually does attack and hit the bad guy. So it was kind of cool. It's one of those cool little flavor things that happens sometimes in a game.
And because it was specific, it became a memorable moment. Anytime you roll a 20, it usually becomes memorable because it is getting the best that you can be. And the DM, it's usually up to them to describe how a scene plays out based on the roll. It doesn't always have to be. That's between you and the table. I tend to, just because I like flavor text. But I also will oftentimes give them a direction of, okay, how do you want to approach this? And then I just put the cherry on top. That's what we're getting at with specific beats general. Not just the more specific the rule is, but the more specific of your action. It beats being general and boring and bland. It gives you memorable moments. Anything else we might have missed in that?
No, I don't think so. I think that pretty much covered that part of it. I'm sure we can cover it even deeper later.
Oh, definitely. There's far more. When we start getting into the rules, this will be brought up, I'm sure, much more. But now we get into the parts that I really like. We're going to talk a little bit about our namesake, the pillars of adventuring. D&D says that there are 3 pillars of adventure, and I slightly disagree. They say there is exploration, social interaction, and combat. But personally, because it is such a integral part of Dungeons and Dragons, and it has been since the first edition forever and a day ago, I like to add puzzles in as the fourth pillar. And we'll dive into that much more in depth in its time, but we're going to start with exploration. It is the first pillar, and it involves how you move and interact throughout the world. It can be as narrow as to where you're standing in the group, or as broad as the overall world in which you're currently in. Exploration is the scene and how you traverse through it. Both the players and the dungeon masters are active participants in exploration, though they have very different functions. Dungeon masters will want to guide their players towards the story and the goal. And yes, later episodes we will have tips on how to effectively do that without feeling like you're railroading them, without feeling like they don't have a choice but to go XYZ. So, the DM should have a clear idea of what should and could happen in the area, and be ready for the players to be the unknown variable to make everything change. I cannot tell you how many times I set up a scene where I think, hey, they're gonna go do this thing, do this thing, do this thing. The first time I actually ran a Tyranny of Dragons module, right after the first chapter, they said, we're gonna go raid Baldur's Gate before the cult does, and beat them to the spoils of the city. I'm going, you guys are level 2. The dumb thing is it worked. Not that I recommend that.
I'm afraid Tymm does that once in a while. I try not to do it often because derailing everything kind of puts a damper on the entire thing sometimes. So.
Sometimes. But there are also other, like, the Elemental Evil campaign, Princes of
the Apocalypse?
Yes, Prince of the Apocalypse. Where one of the big critiques with the first part of the Tyranny of Dragons is that it is very linear for the first few chapters, and honestly, it's unbalanced. Which I did fix a lot of that leading into it, because I knew it. Part of that's with our homebrew mana, part of it is with I just adjusted some of the fight sizes. Prince of the Apocalypse is the other direction. It is way too open. You have, in the beginning, without an experienced group, there is too much to do. You have no idea. So you're going, okay, where do I start? Where do I go? All that stuff. So as a DM, you need to know where these are. And be able to take that unknown variable of the players and make the change. Players, they're the reactive element. The world was built by the DM or the world builders, however. We can assume that the worlds have a life and breath of their own. That throughout the world, much as I mentioned earlier, nothing will change unless an outside force changes it. How much of that really is wholly dependent upon you and the DM to make sure that, well, you're not destroying the world. Because, well, that would suck.
Right. And I think that also sort of leads us into our next pillar, which is social interaction, because really it's the social interaction between the players and the DM. And this is the method that is probably about 40% of everything that happens.
True made-up statistic.
What's that?
It's a true made-up statistic.
It is. And yeah, I mean, honestly, it really is. It's probably, I would say it's about that. All the years I've played D and
Some
D.
games it can be more, but I think, yeah, about average, about
Mhm.
40%. Unless you're in one of those really heavy intrigue ones, where you're trying
Yeah,
to figure out, the whodunits.
right, right. Then it's probably a lot
A
more.
lot more. Some
Um,
some of the spots in Ravenloft with Strahd gets about 70% of it.
mm.
But boy, that may be the next one I run. I love Strahd.
Cool. I'll join that one. So, but the social interaction is more than just what you're seeing between the NPCs run by the DM and the players between each other. It's how your characters interact both verbally and physically sometimes with the other residents of the world. Um, it's it's where your backstories can flourish or be developed in some cases, such as my little tiefling bard was essentially a traveling gypsy, for lack of a better word. In our world, we call him Stroth, but yeah, he traveled, so he's got kind of a backstory behind him. Um, but um, it's where the story elements of the DM's narrative um, get sort of fleshed out, and um, it's often one of the most overlooked and vital parts to actually give each game life. Um, so, my advice really is to get to know your own character and decide how much or how little of um, their own story is told. Because not everyone is willing to kind of share their tragic motivations for adventuring, or even their cool motivations. Um, and sometimes there's a chilling secret or motivation um, um, that can be thrilling for everyone at the table, and maybe that can come out in little bits and pieces. And I personally encourage everyone to read up a little bit on foreshadowing. And I think that's something that we'll probably touch on in future episodes as well, because it's a great literary device. And it is excellent for this particular pillar, and also keeping the game and the story fresh. Uh, some players, like I've played Lost Mine and Fandelver about 5 times now, but
Great one to
with
start with.
each, yeah, but each time that I play it, I have a different character with a different backstory and a different um, race and a different class, and it changes, um, and it really does change the story and make it more fun each time I play
And that's
it.
another thing. And I've been with some of the dungeon master groups that I'm part of. There's been some lamentation of the people who are very mechanical players in Dungeons and Dragons. They focus solely on the, okay, what reward am I getting? What level am I getting? What, um, so on and so forth. And they lean on something called inspiration points, which we'll get into that later too, and why I don't use them. But the point of the social interaction part is there's so much more in the game than just experience, combat, killing. It's so much into you're building a character and you're building everything with it. Imagine watching a TV show or a movie where the character, you don't know why they're doing what they're doing. No one's going to stay and watch that. You won't enjoy it. It'll be a forgettable movie, except for possibly how bad it is. And I like a good bad movie,
Hmm.
but there's got to be something that keeps things rolling.
Hmm.
Um, I am going to be nice. I'm not going to let Tim talk about the puzzles because that's my pillar. I actually have a special place in my heart for the puzzles because that's where we stop taking the dice into account sometimes and start putting intellect and chance together. The puzzles can be as simple as a trap, and they aren't a traditional pillar, but they are a common component of many, many tabletop games, not just Dungeons & Dragons. They add the non-combat encounters to test the mettle of the party, and the players themselves. Puzzles don't have to be complicated. It could be simple as arranging these things in the proper size from biggest to smallest, and the door opens. Or it could be high-level challenge. Take into account people at the table and the character scores. So if the people at the table themselves aren't good at puzzles, some of us aren't, you can have them do things like intelligence checks and different discoveries throughout, and you can give them hints on how to complete the puzzle. And if it's going too long, you can say, all right, you whisper the solution to either someone you want more involved, or have someone's character that you want to be the hero of that. It's like, hey, their character's supposed to be smart enough to figure this out. You figure this out. It allows the cerebral characters, even if the guy playing it, he's a big, dumb, musclehead, stereotypical jock. Thrilled that he can tie his shoelace in the morning because he's just not good with that thinking stuff. I am leaning heavy into a trope and I feel ashamed of myself. I'm doing it anyway. This will let him get that confidence and not just have to big, strong muscle through everything. It also will allow characters to find other ways around. Not every encounter needs to be fought through. Not every encounter needs to be forced through. And not every encounter involves another creature directly. So you're going through, and puzzles are there to give you another layer of suspense, of action. There's been a few puzzles I have, and hopefully we'll be seeing one of... I was going to talk a bit more about it, but I plan on using this in the campaign, so I'm not going to.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, there's a handful of puzzles that, based on the reactions, based on the types, you can make it so there is now a sense of urgency in the puzzle. I need to do something. Something has to happen. And it's set into it, if you craft it correctly, and then set a timer. Okay, people think, all right, I gotta do the thing, I gotta do the thing, I gotta do the thing. And if they don't do a thing, something will happen. That's your choice.
Right. I ran a one-shot called The Mad Manor of Astabar, and it's got a puzzle in it where it's got eight skulls with runes of the phases of the moon, and they have to replace those skulls in order onto skeletons around a dinner table in order to open up a vault.
Well, that's mildly disturbing.
If they get it wrong, they get hit with lightning. So yeah, it is mildly disturbing, but it's kind of a fun puzzle, I think.
Oh yeah.
They have to first of all, they have to interpret the runes correctly. Then they have to put them in the correct order, and so it's kind of fun in that way. And I think we've pretty much discussed most of puzzles, at least for now.
Without getting into specific puzzles that can be stolen, yeah, I think that covers it fairly solid.
Yeah. So Kestrel was gracious enough to let me talk about one of my favorite parts. I love role playing, but combat is awesome. Um, Combat is how you violently solve your problems um, that are put before you. Now, I I love playing barbarians. I've played at least 3 barbarians. I'm playing a paladin, so combat. My characters tend to be pretty combat heavy.
Even your bard is ridiculously good at combat.
Yeah,
And that never happens.
He is kind of good at combat, that's for sure. Um, he's got a really high dex, so it helps. And in most cases, your party is going to be outnumbered, but rarely should you be outmatched. There are sometimes story elements that make sense to build suspense, make your main villain appear, and give that sense of power. But those times as the dungeon master, they should be used sparingly, not overdone, and never out to murder the players. One of the things that I like the way Kestrel runs his games, he says, if you're going to die, you're going to earn your death. So he's not out to kill us. He's out to tell the story, and if we make a stupid move, we'll deserve the death.
And we actually had a great one in the last week with Langdarosa Kyan Wrath, who is a half-dragon warrior with the Cult of the Dragon. He called out for a single champion, and the person that I wanted to go out there and fight said, yes, I'll do it. Like, perfect, I don't have to nudge him any further. And first of all, the fight lasted 3 rounds, which was 1 more round than I expected it to. And second, he actually hit him twice, which was phenomenal. But there is basically no way that particular fight, based on how that character is in, will result in victory. As it is written, if the player character, and I didn't want to do this way, but as is written, that particular enemy automatically takes them down to 0, so they're unconscious, and when you're unconscious, you have 3 death saving throws. Well, it's supposed to eliminate one of those, which you have. We'll get into how to fix those later. But that's a serious thing early on in a game, to be down a death save.
Mm-hmm.
So, I didn't like that because I wanted him to see, yeah, this guy's serious business. We just took the physically strongest person, and in a fist fight, effectively, our strongest person in the party just got made to look like a ragdoll. He didn't earn the death, so he didn't get any punishment aside from being knocked down and then immediately being brought back to life by NPCs.
Yeah. Oh, I think Skladba threw a healing word at him too. And that was actually kind of fun to be a part of. And combat can be as fun as you want to make it. The more descriptive you can be, the more engaging it is, such as Skladba jumping off the bear and doing a flip and brandishing his rapier and slicing the bad guy. And you can watch our stream here at twitch.tv/Kestrel_MacKnight, or even the replays on Kestrel's personal YouTube. Also mine. I'll give you my YouTube channel, Kes.
Perfect.
So I'll probably want to move it over to my channel as well.
Yeah, I can do that for you. I can get through the copies.
And so that'll be good for some examples of what we're talking about, because as players, we're pretty descriptive, and Kess is definitely descriptive. Because if you're just taking turns and plotting through, it can get repetitive and boring. Oh yeah, I'm gonna roll. Okay, I hit him with my axe, and I rolled a 17. There's no real description in it, so you want to find ways to spice it up. Do you want to attack with the mace? Well, then tell your DM how you want to attack. Do you want to thrust it in his stomach, trying to knock the wind out of him? Do you swing at his head? Or would you like to try to break his arm with a blow? These are all possible and able to be played out a little bit. It may require additional rolls for other effects, or it may just cause damage. That's really up to the DM. And I want to encourage you DMs to allow and embrace flavorful combat. Not only will it make the combat more dynamic at your table, but I promise that your players are going to feel more awesome, and they're going to have more fun. They're going to feel like the heroes that they're setting out to play.
And that's actually another great point brought up there with embrace the flavorful combat. Jonah, our druid, in bear form, decided, hey, I'm going to bite the leg of this cultist. Now, he didn't say he was going to try to cripple him, but he hit a really high roll on that. So I decided if it didn't kill him, which it ultimately did, but because of how high the roll was, that was going to, and because he did that I'm doing a targeted attack on the leg, I was going to reduce the movement speed of that cultist so he couldn't get away as quickly.
Mhm.
Did I say that ahead of time? No. Did he know that that was a possibility? Yeah, I don't know. He's still a fairly new player, which is cool. But it was such a great thing to see him try it, do a targeted thing, and cheer that, hey, this worked out great. I love it. Let's see some more of these.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It,
Right. And I think the druid and the bard worked pretty well together in that combat. That was the same combat that he picked my character up as we were running toward. This was after he bit the leg.
mhm.
I think we played pretty well together, and that was fun.
And it comes into that,
In the combat.
yeah, it gets everything in. And it really brings me to the next point here. It's important to know that the 4 pillars we went with, they don't stand alone. They're not meant to. You can and should incorporate multiple of these in basically every moment. Are your players and the monsters quipping back and forth in combat? Why or why not? I mean, if they can't talk, that's a good reason not to. But are you encouraging movement in the space, using the field to your advantage? You've got a map, you've got this room, you've got this space involved. Fill it up. Are you simply walking up and fighting? Are you whipping out that dinosaur word book, the thesaurus for the common man, and using more descriptive words to exemplify your attacks? Now, I actually have done sword fighting in real life. I've done that. There's only so many ways you can describe a parry and a block and stab. There's only so many ways you can do that. But if you say it the same way over and over, it gets boring.
Mhm.
A great thing that I go back to when I'm looking at stuff, I actually watch old episodes of TV show Highlander and try to think to myself, how would I describe this fight sequence? Because I trained with the guy who did the choreography for that, but still. It's one of those levels of how would you describe this fight? You can do it with kung fu movies, or you can do it with, pretty much anything with a combat involved. I go with the Highlander because it's one of the go-tos that I enjoy, and it's a situation of, hey, it has swords. How would I describe how he swings this one? Combat in that was unique almost every fight. They're not just doing the same move each episode. And it's... I'll get into this part later, because I've been playing way too much with hit points, and I'm not going to log down on that one. But the more of these pillars that you can weave in, the more memorable the events will be. I mean, so in recent history, I know we've talked about a few of them, but Tymm, what would you say has been your most memorable experience in D&D?
Well, obviously the Skladba one, but I played a druid in one, and we were about ready to fight a green dragon, and so the dragon was inside kind of a tower thing.
Okay.
And so one of the characters gave me a potion of flying, and I wild shaped into a bear, flew up and over into where the dragon was, where the rest of our
I love
party,
it.
Yeah, the rest of the party was trying to chain him up and kind of keep him down on the ground, and went and actually did attack with the claws and the bite, and then when he was distracted, flew back up, and then dropped my wild shape and shot him a couple of times with the arrow. We eventually, it wasn't supposed to have been a kill, but with our group working together, tying him down with chains, me flying in and surprising him that way, yeah, we killed him. It was kind of fun. My little druid was a little badass.
I think one of my favorite, and this is actually an old one. I was a teenager during this one, so at least 20 years ago, not a little bit longer. We were playing the game, and my brother was DMing, and we should have gone to sleep long before we got to this fight. Because one of the guys was not holding on well. And he was very tired. I was an elf ranger. I seem to play this a lot. And he had a dwarf warrior who had a battle axe. Not uncommon for dwarf warriors. And we got beset upon by, and I forget who else was in the party, but they are irrelevant to this story. We get beset upon by a group of orcs. I want to say there was like 10 or 12. It was going to be a tough fight. He won initiative, so he goes, alright, where's the closest orc? Like, he's about 10 feet away. Alright, I'm gonna run up to him and I'm gonna shove my battle axe up his wee-wee. Now, my brother goes, okay, well, if you want to do that, and want specifically like that, you need a 20. No other way about it, you need a 20. He succeeds. So he does the only thing that a wise man would do at that point. He has all the other orcs run away in fear, because if you see a dwarf shove a battle axe up someone's wee-wee, you are not sticking around. I almost ran away from that, like, nope, no. No. But every session can be like that. There can be something memorable from every session. With some creativity, courage, and just a little bit of luck. Your sessions can be too.
Yeah.
But with that, I think we've covered over a lot of great stuff to get you started in understanding the basic concepts and philosophies behind Dungeons & Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that, I am Kestrel MacKnight.
And I am Tymm Gwayn.
And this has been Pillars of Adventuring. Join us next week, where we we'll start exploring how to create a character